Matthew Evans, a man of wealth and influence in his late 70s, sat alone in the driver's seat of his gleaming silver Mercedes. His thumb tapped impatiently against the leather-wrapped steering wheel, his frustration mounting with every second that passed. The air conditioner hummed steadily, struggling to keep the oppressive Kentucky heat at bay, but the discomfort in the car was nothing compared to the annoyance simmering within him. Having spent decades in the finance industry, Matthew was accustomed to life bending to his will. He had built an empire through shrewd investments and relentless ambition, ensuring that his twilight years were spent in luxury, surrounded by the best money could buy. But today, fate had dealt him an unexpected inconvenience. He was stranded on the side of a desolate road with a flat tire, far from the comforts of his grand estate. He had tried calling for roadside assistance, but the spotty service in this rural stretch of road left him disconnected. After several failed attempts, he exhaled sharply and leaned back against the seat, resigning himself to wait. The stillness of the area was unsettling. The occasional rustle of leaves and the distant chirping of cicadas only amplified his isolation. He was contemplating his next move when he spotted movement in his peripheral vision, a lone figure approaching from down the road. As the figure drew closer, Matthew could make out a boy, no older than 13 or 14. He was dressed in a faded t-shirt and worn-out sneakers, his clothes dusty from travel. The boy's pace was steady, his expression determined, and when he reached the car, his eyes quickly scanned the situation before settling on Matthew. He gave a polite nod before speaking. "Got a flat, sir?" he asked, his voice calm and steady. Matthew hesitated for a moment before nodding. Yes, I do," he admitted, feeling a strange mix of relief and unease. "I was hoping for some help, but my phone isn't getting any signal out here." The boy offered a small, knowing smile. "I can help with that," he said without hesitation, dropping to one knee beside the car to inspect the damage. "My grandpa taught me how to change a tire last summer. Do you have a spare?" Matthew gestured toward the trunk, watching with curiosity as the boy retrieved the necessary tools and set to work. There was a quiet confidence in the way he moved, efficient, assured, methodical. His hands, though young, worked with a skill that suggested experience beyond his years. Matthew, who had always prided himself on being in control, found himself standing idly by, humbled by the ease with which this child was solving his problem. Minutes passed in silence, save for the occasional sound of metal against metal. As the boy worked, Matthew's initial discomfort faded into something unfamiliar: respect. Here was someone who expected nothing in return, who saw a problem and simply fixed it because he could. That kind of selflessness was foreign in Matthew's world, where every interaction had a price, where kindness was often a mask for hidden agendas. When the boy finally stood up, wiping his hands on his jeans, he offered a small, satisfied smile. "All done." Matthew reached into his wallet, pulling out a few crisp bills. "Here, take this," he said, extending the money toward the boy. "I really appreciate your help." But the boy took a step back, raising his hand in polite refusal. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything, just happy to help." Matthew stood there stunned as the boy turned and began walking back down the road. The money still in his hand suddenly felt heavier than it should. In all his years, he had rarely encountered someone who acted without the expectation of compensation. The encounter left him feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time: moved. He watched the boy's figure shrink into the distance through the rearview mirror before finally slipping the money back into his wallet. As he resumed his drive, his thoughts kept drifting back to the young stranger. There was a quiet dignity about him, a strength that didn't come from wealth or power, but from something deeper, something Matthew couldn't quite define. That night, Matthew sat alone in his lavish study, surrounded by shelves filled with books he rarely read. A perfectly prepared steak and asparagus sat untouched on the table beside him. His mind, usually preoccupied with investments and business dealings, was consumed by the memory of the boy. He had met thousands of people throughout his life: partners, employees, investors, every interaction dictated by negotiations, expectations, and exchanges. But this boy had helped him without asking for anything in return. The purity of that gesture gnawed at something deep within Matthew, something he had long since buried. The next morning, he found himself unable to ignore the pull of curiosity. He needed to find the boy. He didn't fully understand why. Maybe it was guilt, maybe gratitude, or maybe something else entirely. Whatever the reason, he got into his car and drove back to the same stretch of road, searching for any sign of the boy. Hours passed as he stopped at gas stations and small diners, asking around, describing the boy to anyone who would listen. Most people shrugged or shook their heads, until finally, a woman at a small cafe wiped her hands on her apron and said, "Sounds like you're talking about Elijah. That boy's always helping folks around here. Lives with his mama over in Harlan." Matthew committed the name to memory and thanked the woman before setting off toward the small town nestled in the foothills of the Appalachians. The drive was beautiful, but Matthew barely noticed, his mind racing with questions. Who was this boy? What kind of family had raised him? What kind of life did he lead? When he arrived in Harlan, he asked a few locals about Elijah and was eventually directed to a modest house on the outskirts of town. The house was small, the paint slightly faded, the front porch sagging under its own weight. Yet it was well kept, exuding a quiet warmth that contrasted sharply with the grandeur of Matthew's own home. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door. After a moment, a woman in her early 40s answered. She looked tired but kind, her sharp eyes filled with curiosity as she sized up the unexpected visitor. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," Matthew said, clearing his throat. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I believe I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." Her expression softened instantly. "That sounds like my Elijah," she said with a smile. "He's always helping folks." "I just wanted to thank him properly," Matthew said. "He wouldn't accept anything from me yesterday." She nodded and stepped aside. "He's out back, you're welcome to wait." Matthew stepped inside, taking in the modest surroundings. The furniture was old but clean, the walls adorned with family photos and hand-drawn pictures from a much younger Elijah. It was nothing like his own mansion with its pristine surfaces and expensive artwork, yet it felt far more like a home. As he followed her to the backyard, he saw Elijah repairing a wooden fence. The boy looked up, surprised to see him. "Hey, Mr. Elijah said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Did you get another flat?" Matthew chuckled, shaking his head. "No, Elijah, I came to see you." Elijah tilted his head, confused. "Why?" Matthew smiled. "Because I wanted to say thank you, and because I think I have a lot to learn from you." Elijah grinned. "Well, sir, I guess we all have things to learn from each other." And for the first time in a long while, Matthew Evans felt truly humbled. Matthew had always been a man of structure, of carefully laid plans and meticulous execution. Yet the events of the past few weeks had unraveled a part of him he hadn't even realized was tightly wounded. Recognition for strength wasn't something he'd ever thought about before, but standing there, watching Elijah and his mother, he understood it in a way he never had. They weren't just strong in the way most people thought about it. They were resilient, steadfast, unwavering despite everything life had thrown at them. The next morning, Matthew made calls, dozens of them. He reached out to old colleagues, contractors he had worked with in the past, suppliers who owed him favors. By midday, a plan had taken shape. Within a week, trucks rumbled down the road leading to Elijah's home, their presence disrupting the quiet of the neighborhood. Workers poured in, tools in hand, setting up for what was about to be a complete transformation of the house that had long stood on shaky ground. Standing on the sidewalk with a clipboard, Matthew orchestrated the effort with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra. Every nail, every beam, every plank of wood was accounted for. Elijah and his mother stood to the side, their expressions a mixture of shock and gratitude. The boy's mother, still unsure how to process it all, turned to Matthew, her voice trembling as she spoke. "You didn't have to do this," she murmured, eyes darting across the scene before her, filled with the bustle of construction workers unloading supplies. "We've managed fine on our own." Matthew turned to her, his expression sincere, his voice gentle. "You've done more than manage," he said. "You've thrived, but you gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. Let me give something back." Elijah, normally full of energy and conversation, was unusually quiet. He stood close to his mother, watching everything unfold with a thoughtful look on his face. Matthew knelt down slightly to meet his gaze. "You taught me something, Elijah," he said softly. "Helping people isn't about money, it's about showing up, and I want to show up for you." Over the next several weeks, the house underwent a transformation, unlike anything the small town had seen in years. The sagging porch, once on the verge of collapse, was replaced with sturdy wood. The roof, riddled with leaks, was patched up and reinforced. Out back, where a rusty, worn-down swing set had stood for years, a brand new one was erected in its place, complete with a fresh coat of paint and solid chains that wouldn't break under pressure. Inside, the walls were painted, their faded and peeling layers replaced with warm, inviting colors. The one-scratched floors gleamed after being polished to perfection. The kitchen, where Elijah and his mother had prepared countless meals over the years with outdated appliances, was upgraded with modern, efficient ones that would make their lives easier. It was no longer just a house. It was becoming a home. At first, Elijah wanted to help, running around with his small hands gripping planks of wood and sweeping away debris with more enthusiasm than effectiveness. Matthew smiled, gently ruffling the boy's hair. "Your job," he said, "is to enjoy being a kid for a little while." Still, Elijah couldn't resist watching. His curiosity was insatiable. He stood on the sidelines, eyes wide with wonder as he observed the crew measure, cut, and build. One of the workers, a burly man named Joe, noticed and called him over. "You want to help?" Joe asked with a grin. "How about you hold the measuring tape for me?" Before long, Elijah was asking questions about tools, about construction, about how things worked. His excitement was infectious, spreading to the workers who found themselves teaching as much as they were building. From a distance, Matthew watched it all unfold, a warm sense of pride swelling in his chest. For the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something meaningful. Something real. The boy's enthusiasm reminded him of a younger version of himself, the ambitious dreamer he used to be before life had become a blur of boardrooms, contracts, and stock portfolios. He had spent so long chasing something he could never quite grasp, but here, in this small town, he felt like he had finally caught it. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the renovations neared completion. The family stood on the newly built porch, marveling at what their home had become. Elijah's mother turned to Matthew, her eyes brimming with emotion. "This isn't just a house anymore," she whispered. "It's a home. I don't know how we could ever thank you." Matthew shook his head, his voice quiet but firm. "You already have. You reminded me of what life is really about: family, connection, purpose. I think I'm the one who should be thanking you." The final day of construction felt more like a celebration than anything else. Neighbors stopped by to see the transformation, bringing small gifts, freshly baked bread, jars of homemade jam, even a potted plant. Elijah's laughter filled the air as he raced around the yard, showing his friends the new swing set and the beautifully redone rooms inside. Matthew stood on the front porch, leaning against the new railing, taking it all in. He hadn't felt this kind of joy in years. Simple, unfiltered joy that came from seeing others thrive. Elijah's mother walked over, handing him a cup of iced tea with a warm smile. "You've done more than fix a house," she said softly. "You've given us hope, and I think you found something for yourself too." Matthew took a sip, nodding. "I have," he admitted. "I spent so many years chasing things I thought mattered: money, status, influence, but none of it ever felt like this." As the sun set, Elijah bounded up the porch steps, his energy still endless. He looked up at Matthew, his expression thoughtful. "Mr. Matthew," he said, hesitating slightly, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for us, and I think I want to do something like that one day. I want to help people too." Matthew placed a firm hand on the boy's shoulder, his voice steady. "You already are, Elijah. Your kindness set all of this in motion. Don't ever lose that." The three of them sat together, watching as the sky shifted from gold to deep orange, the warmth of the day lingering in the air. But there was a deeper warmth between them now, one built from connection, gratitude, and a shared sense of purpose. When it was time for Matthew to leave, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's wide grin, his mother's tearful smile, these were moments Matthew would never forget. As he drove away, he realized this wasn't an ending. It was the beginning of something new. In the weeks that followed, more changes took place. Elijah's curiosity about construction grew into a full-fledged passion. Matthew arranged for him to shadow some of the workers, eager to learn more about the craft that had so fascinated him. And as for Matthew, he found himself returning to the town again and again. It no longer felt like a place he visited. It felt like home. The story had come full circle, back to a small town with a big heart. It had all started with one act of kindness, and it had led to something far greater than any of them could have imagined. In the end, life wasn't about what you had. It was about what you gave. As the days turned into weeks, Matthew found himself returning to Harlan more frequently. What had initially been a single act of kindness grew into something much larger. He became deeply involved in the town's small but tight-knit community, forging bonds that he had never expected. Each time he visited, he was welcomed with warm smiles and open arms, and with every passing day, he felt more at home than he ever had in his sprawling city apartment. Elijah's curiosity about construction continued to flourish. He eagerly absorbed every lesson from the workers, memorizing measurements, learning how to use different tools, and understanding the basics of building. Matthew, seeing his passion, arranged for more experienced builders to mentor him. They took Elijah under their wing, showing him how to read blueprints and construct sturdy foundations. The young boy's enthusiasm was infectious, and soon the entire town took notice of his dedication. One afternoon, as Matthew and Elijah stood in the backyard, Joe, the burly construction worker, approached them with an idea. "You know, kid, you've got a real knack for this. What if we built something together, something that would last?" Elijah's eyes lit up. "Like what?" Joe chuckled. "A community workshop, a place where folks can learn, fix things, and build something for themselves." Matthew, overhearing the conversation, smiled. "That's a brilliant idea. We could create a space where people come together, share skills, and support each other. Elijah, what do you think?" Elijah didn't hesitate. "Let's do it." Within days, the town rallied behind the idea. The enthusiasm was overwhelming. People donated supplies, tools, and time. Retired carpenters and mechanics offered to teach classes, and young volunteers, inspired by Elijah's determination, stepped in to help build the workshop from the ground up. Matthew invested his own resources into the project, but unlike his past business ventures, this didn't feel like an obligation. It felt like purpose. As the workshop took shape, Matthew and Elijah spent more time together, their bond growing stronger. It wasn't just about construction, it was about mentorship, friendship, and passing on wisdom. Matthew shared stories of his past, of the moments he had once thought defined success. Elijah, in return, taught him the beauty of simplicity, of helping without expecting anything in return. The grand opening of the community workshop was a day the town would never forget. Families gathered, laughter filled the air, and a sense of unity enveloped everyone. A plaque was placed on the front door, engraved with words that moved Matthew to his core. "Built with heart," a reminder that the greatest things in life are not measured by wealth, but by the hands that build and the hearts that give. Tears welled in Matthew's eyes as Elijah turned to him. "We did it, Mr. Matthew, we really did it." Matthew ruffled the boy's hair. "No, Elijah, you did this, you started it all." As the sun set that evening, Matthew found himself standing by his car, staring at the town that had changed his life. He no longer saw it as just another small place on the map, it was home. He glanced down at his phone, an email from a prestigious firm flashing across the screen, offering a lucrative deal. A deal that once would have thrilled him. But now he hesitated. Turning off the phone, he breathed deeply, inhaling the crisp evening air. Money, status, power, they no longer held the same allure. What mattered was here. In the laughter of children, in the warmth of a community, in the knowledge that he had made a difference. Elijah and his mother stood on the porch, watching him with knowing smiles. "Leaving so soon?" she asked softly. Matthew smiled, shaking his head. "Not this time." And just like that, a man who once measured success by the size of his bank account found himself richer than he had ever been. Not in money, but in love, purpose, and a place he could finally call home.